learn through social settings and watching others and learning from that and adapting that into our own thinking and behavior. Um, but again, the definition of observational learning is when we watch others and then imitate or model that observed learning into our own learning and or into our excuse me into our own behavior. Sometimes it's called social learning. Sometimes you'll see observational and social kind of intertwine or interchangeable. Totally fine. It's the same thing. Um, and this can be good or bad. This can be, obviously you can learn positive behavior through watching others, but you can also pick up on some bad behaviors and negative behaviors as well. But we'll get into all that more in just a minute. So, probably the most famous psychological example or psychology example of observational learning is what was the experiment done by Albert Bandura. Um, it's kind of called nicknamed kind of the Bobo the Clown experiment, and mostly because of the doll of the toy he used in the experiment. And if you look at the picture here, and also if just a note, if you look in the PowerPoint when I post the PowerPoints, this is a link right here down here at the bottom where it says the experiment footage. And if you watch that, um, basically what happened is Bandura took a bunch of 4-year olds and had them in a room where they could see into another room, kind of like a one-way mirror, or like a see-through mirror, excuse me, into another room. And um, basically, they saw an adult come into the room, and uh, this clown doll that you see in the middle of that photograph, which is kind of like a punching bag almost, that if you knocked it over, it came right back up. It was um, the adult came in and picked it up and threw it and kind of punched it and pushed it over and kind of kicked it and things like that, and not in a necessarily like overly violent way, but just it was just kind of in a kind of violent, sort of mischievous kind of behavior. And then after the children viewed that, Bandura then recorded them going into the room themselves, and what he found, and there were a lot of other toys in the room. And if you watch the footage, which obviously I would show in class if we were in class together, but if you watch the footage, these kids have other toys like cars and like play kitchen. You can kind of see the kitchen in the background of that photograph there. Um, and the kids played with that, but then also at some point while they were in the room, they started to basically do the same thing that these adults had been doing. They kicked it, they punched it, they picked it up and threw it. They took toys in the room and threw it at them. And in some cases, they actually went further than the adults did. They picked up like toy hammers and toy guns that were in the room and acted as if they were going to be violent towards um, the clown doll itself. And so what Bandura basically came to the conclusion is, and what he used in his his findings was that um, children who went into that room without seeing the adult do that to the doll rarely um, did that behavior. However, if they had seen the adult kick, punch, throw the doll, then they tended to mimic and mirror that behavior. And in some cases, take it even further. So Bandura's studies have been used a lot in the argument, the kind of age-old argument we have in this country about watching violent television shows and movies and video games and things like that. And, you know, does watching that cause violent or aggressive behavior? And obviously Bandura believes that that is the case, that you're going to be maybe not necessarily do the exact same behavior, but you're going to be more aggressive or more likely to be aggressive and violent if you see violent and aggressive behavior in front of you. So this is probably the most famous, I don't want to say the most, but one of the most famous studies done with observational learning and showing how children, especially young children, um, mimic the actions of those that are uh, older than them. And in fact, that is true of, just kind of a side note, that is true of really any child of that age. Like children naturally try to mimic those that they watch and that they look up to, and that and more so if they look up to them. I'm seeing this with my own kids now. Like, Hayden, my son, who is almost 2 years old, if he sees his sister Charlotte, who's 6, do something, he tries to do it. If she jumps on, if she jumps from one side of the couch to the other, he tries to do it. If she, um, picks something up and throws it, he tries to do it. I mean, it's natural human behavior for us to want to do that, and even more so when we're young and when we're learning how to behave ourselves. On that same note, that is modeling. When we look at someone and their behavior serves as a model to our own behavior, that's where that term comes from. Um, just one real quick story. I'm gonna try not to tell too many stories while I'm doing these videos because it takes up time. But I remember one time I was in the grocery store, and I saw this woman who was talking on the phone, and if you've ever been to like Harris Teeter or Food Line or whatever, they have the little kids carts that look just like big shopping carts, but they're smaller for kids. And her daughter, who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, 6 years old, was walking behind her, and this mom was talking on the phone and not really paying attention behind her to what her daughter was doing, and she like picked something up off the shelf, looked at it, read, decided she didn't want it, and put it back, and then kept walking. And the daughter, who was right behind her pushing the cart just like her mom, grabbed something off the shelf, looked at it, and put it right back, and kept on walking. And that's just a perfect example of modeling. Like, she didn't know why she was doing that. She didn't know why she was, you know. She just saw her mom do it, and that obviously she wants to model what her mom is doing behavior wise. So that's why she decided to do it. And sometimes it's without thinking, but that's what we learn so much as kids, and even as adults we do this. Like, if you're in a situation where you don't know how you're supposed to act in a certain social setting, you're going to look and see what others are modeling in terms of their behavior, and you're going to follow suit with that as well. So modeling, um, we don't have to be reinforced, we don't have to be told that's good, that's bad. We just pick up on what others are doing, and we tend to follow that behavior, especially if we do not feel like we know how to act in that situation, or if we're young and we're just trying to figure out how to act, basically, or how to behave. This second term on here, disinhibition, this is just a term given to when you watch someone do something. It says scary or troubling, but it doesn't have to necessarily be scary or troubling. It could be something that is dangerous. It could be something that is maybe against the norm, or not really kind of normal behavior, and you see someone do it, and you see them not have consequences, and you decide that, because they don't have consequences, you may try to do the behavior yourself. You see someone, just as an example, you see someone cheat in class on a test or a quiz, and they don't get caught or whatever, so you think that maybe you should try to do that next time, or you can get away with it, and maybe you do, but also there's that chance that you don't, and you get caught and you get in trouble. Or you know I'm not much of a fast driver. I've been told I drive like an old man, but I mean, I know that, if you see someone try to race someone down, like from a stoplight off, down the road or whatever, and no cops pull them over, that then yeah, maybe you think, okay, well, maybe I can do that, but then maybe you do it and you get pulled over for speeding or whatever. Like, that disinhibition is just saying that you see someone do something that is either, maybe against the norm or negative or dangerous, and because there's no consequence, you tend to think that it's okay to do that yourself, and you may get away with it, but you may not, and it can be good or bad. It could be, um, you may decide that that's not what you want to do, or maybe you decide that that is what you want to do. There's a whole list of ways that this can be good or bad, but the whole idea of disinhibition is because the person doesn't get caught, and you see that, and there's no consequences, so that affects how you think of that behavior as well. All right, social. I mentioned, obviously, with observational learning, we learn a lot of our social behaviors through this. It can be good or bad. Pro-social behavior is just the term given to any action that we do that benefits others, or that follows social norms and moral codes and things like that. And the best example of this is, like, obviously, as a parent myself, I try to model behavior that I expect my kids to do when they are in public or when they're around others. And so I'm not trying to sit here and say that I'm a saint, because I've obviously done things I'm not proud of, and I've done things that, I don't want them to do. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to model that behavior for them. I'm not going to, you know, if something negative is going to happen, or whatever, I'm not going to try to model negative behavior for them. I'm going to try to be positive, and that's what pro-social behavior is. So there's things like saying please and thank you, holding the door open for others, being kind and respectful, and those kind of things are pro examples of pro-social behavior. And if kids see their parents doing that or their peers doing that, then they tend to do that as well. I've seen that with my own daughter. You know, if she sees us say, please and thank you or hold the door for someone, she tends to try to do that as well. And it's not just kids. I mean, I know I'm guilty of this. I always try to hold the door open for some people, but sometimes I'll forget, but I'll see someone else doing it, and then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to do that, and it just reminds me of again, that's observational learning as well. So that's pro-social, and then antisocial is the exact opposite. It's anything that is harmful or negative to individuals in society. Um, this would be violence. This would be abuse. This would be any type of negative behavior that can be modeled for others to see, and therefore that behavior could be carried out um, by others as well. And what that last bullet point down there at the bottom says is that if there's a child in a house where abuse is present, physical, violent abuse or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean, or if they're not necessarily harmed themselves, but they see it. So if they see some abuse between the parents or whatever, then that they may grow up hating violence, but at the same time, they could also be more violent as well. Like it's kind of a two-way street. Like it doesn't mean that they necessarily are violent, but it means that they may be more violent than the average child, or they may be more against violence or whatever. Like there's usually an effect, but all that means is that, and it's just no, it's a byproduct of antisocial behavior. It's not something that is furthering society in a positive way. And this can be picked up. This is picked up very you know easily by kids and even adolescents. I mean, I think back to when I was an adolescent. I tended to be not that again, I'm not sitting here saying I'm a saint, but my negative behaviors were usually when I was around other people doing negative behaviors. So, it wasn't like I was just daydreaming of things to do that were bad, and or anything like that. But the behaviors that I did that maybe are considered more antisocial or whatever, were not really in a vacuum. They were usually around or had been seen by others doing it. All right, a couple other things real quick, and then I'm going to wrap this up. Latent learning is something that it's learning that is present, or excuse me, it's learning that is happening but is not immediately present. For example, this there was an experiment. Edward Tolman had this experiment where he took rats and he put them into these cages, or excuse me, into these mazes, um, and just let them walk around. You know, and he didn't always put cheese at a part of the maze as a reward, but he just kind of let them wander around sometimes. But then on the days that he put cheese or a reward, these rats found their way through the maze very quickly. And what he found was that as they were just kind of wandering through, they were creating these what they call cognitive maps um, in their mind, not a literal map, but just a cognitive learning that wasn't it didn't need to be displayed at that moment, but when it was needed to be displayed, they were able to do it. Another example I use in class of this is like, let's say your power goes out one night with a storm. There's supposed to be storms tonight. It's Sunday night right now, wind's starting to pick up, so maybe this happens tonight. But if the power goes out and you don't have lights to guide you through your house, unless your parents are constantly rearranging furniture, you're probably going to be able to make your way through the house pretty easily because you've walked through that house hundreds, thousands, millions of times or whatever, and you've created this kind of cognitive map in your mind that you're able to access when necessary, but you're not always doing it. So that's just another example of latent learning. It's something that it's not immediately evident, but when it needs to be shown, you're able to do it because you've been learning kind of beneath the surface the whole time, which is what latent learning is. Um, and then some other types, insight learning um, is kind of an aha moment or a kind of a flash of understanding. Wolfgang Kohler did this with chimpanzees. He would put bananas or nuts or rewards and things like that, and they had to figure out how to get them. And what he found was that a lot of times they would try a bunch of different things, but then they would, but then they would figure it out. There would be like a flash of understanding. It's not just trying something until it works. That you may do some trial and error initially, but then you figure out, oh, this is how it goes. This is how it works, um, and you're able to figure out. Uh, I see this all the time, like in class. Like maybe not so much in my class, but like I remember when I was in high school and math classes or whatever, if I tried a bunch of things that didn't work, and then all of a sudden I remembered, oh yeah, I need to use that formula or I need to use this. That was my flash of understanding, and that was my kind of aha moment of, oh, that's how I figure it out. That's insight learning. And then the last thing, behavior modification. This is really the only thing I talk about today that is um, learn like how you use learning to change behavior. This is kind of a therapy type thing, behavior modification, which we'll talk more about at the very end of psychology when we talk about therapies for abnormal behavior. But behavior modification is when you use classical operant or social learning to basically change how you feel and act. So, in other words, like using an example of using operant conditioning would be like, um, using uh, reinforcement schedules of like that we just talked about last lesson with every 5 times you do something you get a reward, or every single time you do something you get a reward, and then that you can use what you get as a reward to cash in at some point. Like they use this a lot in prisons. Prisons will have like a kind of a reward system where inmates, if they collect a certain amount of rewards, they're able to cash them in somehow, which is like maybe for like products they can buy, or behavior, or like maybe privileges or something within the prison they're able to get through this type of behavior. Um, and again, that's more of a therapy thing. Like you're using those to kind of help modify behavior and change your thinking. But I remember another example of this. I think I use this in class when we talk about this is school stores. I remember when I was in like elementary school, we had like this school store where if we got caught doing something we were supposed to do, like positive behavior, we would get like a little fake monopoly money type thing, and we could either turn around and use it right then and buy something cheap at this school store, or we could save up and buy something bigger. I mean, they had like crappy pencils and notebooks and stuff like that, but they also had like bigger things like t-shirts, or like bigger items that we could save up for or whatever. But that's an example as well. It's maybe a very crude example, but again, that's using social. Like you see someone, again, you see someone do that, or you see for yourself someone, or you get the reward yourself, or you see someone else get the reward and cash it in. So therefore, it changes your behavior and your thinking as well. So anyway, I think that's the last slide. Let me check. Yep, that's it. Okay, so that's it for learning. So the next time you see me, that's it for day one. Six or the two things of learning was for this first half of the week of week one of remote learning. Second half will be altered states. I'll get into those a little bit later, but hopefully this was good. Obviously, contact me if something doesn't make sense, and see you guys again a little bit later.